You were in the car, alone, windows up, and somewhere between turning left on Maple Street and pulling into the parking lot, you started doing it again. You were talking, not on the phone, not to a passenger, to yourself. Maybe you were rehearsing what you were going to say in that meeting. Maybe you were narrating the grocery list like you were the host of some mundane cooking show. Maybe, and this is the one that really gets people, you were replaying an argument from 3 days ago and absolutely winning it this time. And then it happened. You glanced to your left, and someone in the next car was looking right at you, mouth still half open, hands mid-gesture, and for one searing, electric second, you felt it. That hot wave of embarrassment that crawls up the back of your neck and settles somewhere behind your ears. You snapped your mouth shut. You pretended to sing along to a song that wasn't even playing. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a quiet little voice, ironic, isn't it, whispered something you've probably whispered to yourself 100 times before. Am I losing it? No, you are not losing it. And today, I want to dismantle that fear so completely that you never feel that embarrassment again. Because what you were doing in that car, what you do in the shower, in the kitchen, in the quiet of your living room when nobody else is home is not a glitch. It is not a symptom. It is one of the most sophisticated cognitive tools your brain has access to, and the fact that you use it instinctively means your mind is operating at a level most people never pause long enough to appreciate. Let's start with what's actually happening when you speak out loud to yourself, because it's far more elegant than it appears. On the surface, it looks like you're talking to nobody. But cognitively, you are doing something extraordinary. You are splitting yourself into two. You are simultaneously becoming the one who speaks and the one who listens, the advisor and the advisee, the coach and the player. You are, in the most literal neurological sense, becoming your own counsel. And that is not a sign of instability. That is a sign of an incredibly active, self-regulating, high-functioning mind that has figured out how to mentor itself. Psychologists have a term for one of the core mechanics behind this. It's called cognitive offloading. And once you understand it, you will never be embarrassed about talking to yourself again. Here's the idea. Your brain's working memory, the part responsible for holding and manipulating information in real time, is powerful but limited. Think of it like a desk. A beautiful, polished desk, but a desk that can only hold so many open files before things start sliding off the edges. When you're trying to plan something complex, when you're navigating an emotional situation, when you're holding 7 different variables in your head while trying to make a decision, that desk gets crowded fast. So, what does your brain do? It finds a way to move some of those files off the desk without losing them. And one of the most effective ways it does this is by turning thoughts into spoken words. When you say something out loud, you are literally transferring cognitive weight from your internal processing system into the physical environment. The thought is no longer just a fragile, flickering signal inside your skull. It's out there. It's in the air. It's vibrating against your own eardrums. You've given it a body. And now your brain can interact with it differently, more clearly, more efficiently, with more room to think around it. You didn't learn this trick from a textbook. Your brain just knew. That in itself is remarkable. But cognitive offloading is only part of the story. Because sometimes when you talk to yourself, you're not just organizing information, you're coaching yourself through something emotionally difficult. And the way you do it reveals another layer of psychological brilliance that researchers have studied extensively. It's called self-distancing. Pay attention to the pronoun you use the next time you catch yourself in one of these moments. Because there's a very good chance you're not saying, "I need to calm down." You're saying you need to calm down. Or even, and this is the one that makes people blush, you're using your own name. Come on, Sarah, get it together. That shift from first person to second or third person is not random. It's not theatrical. It is a deeply powerful psychological mechanism. When you refer to yourself as you or by your own name, you create a small but critical gap between yourself and your emotions. You step outside the storm just far enough to see it clearly. Research, led by psychologist Ethan Kross at the University of Michigan, found that people who use non-first-person pronouns during self-talk show significantly reduced emotional reactivity, lower anxiety, and better performance under stress. They don't feel less. They regulate more effectively. So when you stood in front of the bathroom mirror before that job interview and whispered, "You've got this," you were not being silly. You were deploying a clinically validated emotional regulation strategy without knowing the science, without reading the paper. Your nervous system just reached for the most effective tool it had. And then there's the auditory feedback loop, which is perhaps the most underrated part of this entire phenomenon. A thought that stays in your head is shapeless. It blends with other thoughts, gets tangled in emotion, folds in on itself. But a thought that you speak out loud becomes linear. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has rhythm. It has edges. And crucially, you hear it. The act of hearing your own thought changes your relationship to it entirely. It moves from something you are to something you can evaluate. It stops being weather and starts becoming a map. This is why people talk to themselves when they're problem solving, not because they lack the ability to think quietly, but because thinking quietly isn't always enough. Sometimes the most complex knot in your mind needs to be pulled out of your head and laid flat on the table of your own voice so you can see where the tangles actually are. You're not doing this because something is wrong with you. You're doing this because your brain is sophisticated enough to use itself as both the laboratory and the scientist. Now, here is where things get interesting and a little bit tender, because not all self-talk is instructional. Not all of it is strategic. Sometimes, the voice you use when you talk to yourself is soft, gentle, almost parental. You've had those moments. You come home after a brutal day. You set your keys down, and under your breath, so quiet you barely register it, you murmur something like, "It's okay. You're okay. Just breathe." That is not weakness. That is self-soothing. And it draws on one of the deepest psychological structures we carry, what some clinicians refer to as the inner parent. When you were very young, regulation came from outside. A caregiver's voice, a hand on your back, a soft reassurance that the world wasn't ending. As you grew, you internalized that voice. And now, in moments of distress, your psyche reaches for it. It speaks to you in the tone of someone who cares, and sometimes that voice needs to be externalized. It needs to be heard, not just thought, because hearing it activates the same neural pathways that were activated when someone else comforted you. You are, in the purest sense, reparenting yourself in real time, and that is one of the most emotionally intelligent things a human being can do. So why does society make it weird? Why is the cultural reflex to side-eye someone who moves their lips in the cereal aisle or whispers directions to themselves while assembling furniture? The answer is a dissonance, a gap between stigma and science that has never been properly closed. Historically, visible self-talk has been associated with disorganized thinking, with psychosis, with a loss of contact with reality. And while it is true that certain clinical conditions can involve involuntary auditory experiences, the kind of self-talk we're discussing here is the polar opposite. It is voluntary. It is purposeful. It is a marker of executive functioning, not its breakdown. The person muttering, "Okay," first the carrots, then the onion, then the garlic while cooking is not losing their grip on reality. They are gripping reality tighter. They are using language as a cognitive scaffold to keep their actions organized, sequenced, and intentional. The science doesn't just tolerate this behavior, it endorses it. Studies have shown that people who talk to themselves during visual search tasks find objects faster. Athletes who use motivational self-talk perform with greater consistency under pressure. Children who narrate their actions out loud while learning show accelerated problem-solving abilities. This is not a fringe behavior dressed up with fancy research. This is a core feature of human cognition that we've been shamed out of doing publicly, and that shame has no scientific foundation whatsoever. And you know this intuitively because you've felt the difference. Think about the last time you sat down to read a difficult email, one loaded with subtext and professional tension, and before you even finished the first paragraph, you whispered, "Okay," focused to yourself. That wasn't a breakdown in concentration. That was your brain calling itself to attention, pulling the wandering parts of your mind back to center with a single spoken command. Think about the last time you were in the shower, replaying something someone said to you, and you found yourself staging a full hypothetical response. Out loud, with hand gestures, with pauses for dramatic emphasis. You weren't being delusional. You were processing. You were doing something your brain desperately needed to do. Externalize an emotional charge so it could be examined, refined, and eventually released. Think about the last time you were cooking alone and you murmured the steps to yourself, half reading the recipe and half narrating your movements. A pinch of salt. Okay, now, fold it in. And something about that narration kept you grounded, calm, present. That was instructional self-talk, functioning as a mindfulness anchor. You turned your own voice into a tether to the present moment. This is who you are, and it is not a flaw. It is not a quirk to be grown out of or suppressed in polite company. It is a living, breathing feature of a mind that knows how to take care of itself. You are not talking to nobody when you speak out loud alone. You are talking to the one person who has been with you through every single moment of your life. The one person who knows every context, every nuance, every unspoken fear that shaped the situation you're trying to navigate. You are talking to the only advisor who has complete access to your full internal file. And the fact that you trust that voice enough to let it speak out loud, that you give it room, give it air, give it sound, means you have built something inside yourself that many people never managed to build. A relationship with your own mind. So the next time it happens, and it will, maybe tomorrow morning, when you're looking for your keys and you mutter, okay, think, where did you put them? Or next week when you're psyching yourself up before a phone call you've been dreading, do not clamp your mouth shut. Do not look around to see if anyone noticed. Let it happen. Because that voice is not a sign of something broken. It is the sound of a mind that has learned to be its own anchor, its own coach, its own comfort, its own home. Now I want to hear from you. What's the last thing you caught yourself saying out loud to no one? Drop it in the comments, because I guarantee you are not the only one who said it. And if this made you feel a little more at peace with the voice that's been keeping you company your whole life, subscribe to this channel. We make the things you thought were strange about you make perfect, beautiful, psychological sense. I'll see you in the next one.